welcome. This is episode 3 of the East Midlands podcast. It's the third of 16 episodes, and today we're going to talk about East Midlands Spotlight, things that are going on in the region industrially that are useful. But because this is the first of the season, we're looking at something a bit wider. So we're going to be talking about AI, a topic that comes up against our entire industry, and there's a lot to talk about. We're going to focus on one particular incident that Mel is going to talk us through. But today we've got Kim Gillespie,
Hi.
Ken Osborne, and
Hello.
Gayanne Potter. And I guess to give us a little bit of context, Mel, before you take us in, Equity have got a Stop AI Stealing the Show campaign. And just for a few stats, 94% of performers working in AI think the government should regulate deepfakes and AI manipulation of likenesses. 93% think the government should introduce new legal protections for performers, and 79% felt they didn't have a full understanding of their performance rights before signing contracts. 79% of members of people who were asked, and I think the Gayanne Potter and Scotrail situation kind of illustrates that. So, Mel, you're a voice artist. Talk us through this current minefield.
Yeah, so I suppose that's the first important thing to note, that this is a current case. We're in July 2025, but it's a live case that hasn't been resolved. And for those that are perhaps less familiar with it, we'll put a link in the show notes, is that right, Karen, to the case. But Gayanne Potter is a very experienced Scottish voiceover artist. She's been around for many, decades actually. She's been working in the industry, which is partly why it's a really good example, because despite Gayanne's experience and making sure with contracts available to us through Equity and beyond, she finds herself in a position where her voice has been cloned without her informed consent. Is the important bit to add, because many people are choosing, of course, to be recompensed for cloning their voice. In this case, Gayanne did some work back in 2021 for a company, a Swedish company, Sweden-based company called Reed Speaker, and at the time signed an agreement, a contract that outlaid what the voice was to be used for, which she believed to be around accessibility and e-learning for people who have particular needs. And as the case shows, she highlighted that she did actually query the agreement at the time, because although this was back in 2021, they were still the early stages of people beginning to recognise that you needed to protect yourself and be very, very clear and explicit in your agreements, that you weren't, for example, giving consent for your voice to be used other than that's stated in the contract. And so there were a few tweaks, by all accounts, done. However, earlier on in the year, she started to receive messages from local friends in Scotland saying, we've heard you on Scotrail doing the announcements for the trains. To which she was, quite surprised, because she's never done a recording session for Scotrail. And so, to cut a long story short, is having the support, because Gayanne is an Equity member, thankfully, of Equity, to take on her case. Equity, of course, have taken up the case, and it went national about a month or so ago. It was in the local news and then did go national. Of course, Equity are calling it exploitative, pushing for stronger protection for performers, despite already having available to us, in case people didn't already know, if you are an Equity member and you work in the world of audio, on the Equity website, there's an actual section where you can download various templates, a full contract if you wish, but also some very specific clauses. There's a whole toolkit around protecting yourself in the world of AI and audio to use whenever you're taking on a new job. So I suppose the message really is, however experienced you are, and even when you feel like you've taken those steps to try and protect yourself, you know, Gayanne, someone hugely experienced and respected in the industry, and has found herself in this devastating position to have to challenge legally a company. And so, yes, it's an opportunity for us to highlight that it's happening. We all know it's happening, and not only for us as voiceover artists, it's prevalent in the world of acting. Ken, I could pass over to you and ask you the same question. I'm sure there are cases that can be highlighted or situations that you could talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely, I can. Yeah, and what struck me about this is that we're talking about someone who would normally be perceived to be quite powerful in her field. She's very, very experienced. She's used by organizations and businesses at the very largest scale to be the voice of their brands. So she will obviously have very good representation from agents, you know, agents that are experienced and powerful and have very expensive lawyers. So she is really as big as it gets, and to observe that even someone this powerful and this experienced and this well represented and protected can find their likeness stolen like this is a warning to us all, because of course most people in the industry are not punching at Gayanne's level. Many of us come onto a film set at the very lowest level. We're herded like cattle into our holding area and then told to change into one of our 5 changes of costume for that day. And then if someone comes along and says that they want to scan your digital likeness just in case there's a day of filming you can't do, we're used to just following orders. So do we then step into a 3D scanner?
Yeah, you bring up a really good point there, is that if they've got the scanner on site, and I have heard this happen, where people will go, great, you've had hair and makeup, you've done this, you've done, can you just go next? Everybody's going through the van to be scanned. And then if you're already on set, you're like, oh, what do we do? And I think spotlighting the East Midlands, this sort of is the first of this series of spotlighting. We need to be talking about this together and locally. And if you're in the gaming sector, if you're in film, if you're in TV, a lot of games, especially if you're working in motion capture studios, you'll go today, you'll put your suit on, do a range of movements, especially if you're a dancer, you know, if you're a movement artist, if you're a stunt coordinator or you're a stunt performer. And by the time you've been captured, if you haven't signed something before you go in there, you've already lost the control over your motions. And I know when I've been in studios and they've said, oh, we got some great stuff done yesterday, it was brilliant, movement performance was brilliant, and then the next day they go, oh, it was really awkward performance and they didn't come out as well. And it tended to be because the performers they had the day before were professional actors and they were on their mark, they did their thing, they were, you know, they were movement trained, and yet the volunteers that came in were a lot harder to direct and they were a lot harder to capture. So they're likely to continue to use the data from the good performers. It's massive in terms of AI for voice, for movement, for, you know, just being able to use prompts. And I think the informed consent, I think, is the huge one, because some organizations are using it legitimately through contracts and some are not. I mean, I know the Royal Shakespeare Company have signed contracts with their performers to have them body scanned, to use them as understudies online, and but it is embedded into the contract.
Yeah.
So these precedents need to be looked at. So yeah, what does that mean for us?
Well, it's really interesting. I think So one big idea that comes up for me is the idea that your digital likeness could perhaps have a status in law similar to your actual physical form, such that it becomes sovereign, inviolable, and actually attracts rights.
Yeah, that's what Denmark have done, isn't it?
I cannot be imprisoned against my will, for example, unless ordered so by a judge. So, but at the same time, if we have an idea of digital sovereignty, if that can be enshrined into law, that's a very big idea for a judiciary to approach. We dealt with the idea of physical sovereignty since the Normans. You know, we've spent 1,000 years defining physical personal sovereignty. So we have to define digital sovereignty much more quickly, but perhaps that could be a big idea. Another big idea which struck me is that, in fact, performance capture and then the unwitting or unwilling modification of that performance capture has existed in the fringes of art for quite a long time. And I think I may have talked with my colleagues here before about, in the adult industry, if someone had captured your face and then they had your face available through Photoshop, they could then, in previous times, Photoshop your face onto another body, and you can arise at a performer, a photographic model, having lost control rather of their performance and likeness. But what we're seeing now is the threat of that happening to all performers, and on steroids, with the power of AI behind it. So we've been dealing with this. This is yet another case where that end of the arts industry has been at the forefront of the arts industry, in fact, and at the forefront of those issues and moral obligations and dilemmas for a very long time.
And guess what? We've reached 10 minutes.
You're going to say that?
Well, I didn't say anything about AI.
Is he real? Is Kim
I'm
real?
Informed. I'm informed. Thank you.
With people in East Midlands, we want to have at branch meetings, we want to be able to find out what's happening to us as performers and industrial artists so that we can feed it back to our regional organizer. Regional organizer knows what we want to find out about so that we can protect ourselves here in the East Midlands. Thank you so much for joining us, Kim and Mel and Ken. And if you have listened to us previously, thank you very much. Do remember to subscribe to where you get your podcasts. If you've watched us, do remember to like and subscribe. And hopefully you'll listen into next month's. Bye.
Bye.